Well, I invite you to take your Bibles, if you would, and turn to Nehemiah. We are going to be in Nehemiah chapter 4 this evening. Nehemiah chapter 4. And throughout this chapter, one of the things that we see is these plans, and as I've called them, these sort of battle plans that Nehemiah has established in case of a pending attack that was coming on the children of Israel as they're rebuilding the wall. But we'll look at that in a moment. But I was reminded when I was working at camp, the Christian camp, my first summer of Bible college, there were two program directors that were telling a story of a favorite camp pastime that almost all boys like to do, and I think secretly the women like to do it as well, and that is paintball, a classic camp pastime, paintballing at camp. And these program directors were telling a story of this strategic plan they had come up with to sabotage their campers in a game of paintball. And they had it all planned out to be able to sort of go in early and kind of set themselves up and sneak themselves to this position where they felt they could get all of their unsuspecting campers to come in and just unload on them paintball after paintball, paying them back for all the evil deeds they had done during the week of camp. Because secretly, deep down, that is that's what every Christian camp counselor really wants, to just get back at the kids they counsel. Maybe, no, not really. But, so they had this big plan to come. Unfortunately, their plan was a bit thwarted. And the story was told to me how as they were sitting in their position waiting for these campers to come, who comes behind them but the group of campers themselves, guns loaded, ready to go. And again, it was told to me like everything was happening in slow motion. The one program director, as he was pelted in the back by some paintballs, fell to the ground, looked up at the other program director, who turned around, putting his arms up for surrender, and in slow motion, his body just, as he was hit again and again and again by the campers. Bad strategic battle plan, right? Not good on their part. However, here in Nehemiah, we're going to see a good battle plan, something that is much better thought out, something that we should follow. And as we've stated a few times throughout our study, Nehemiah is doing this on a physical, practical level from the structure of the walls, rebuilding these walls, coming up with a plan for them to safely accomplish this purpose. But there are obviously some spiritual components here that we can apply to ourselves, and I think that Nehemiah understood would be beneficial for those that were rebuilding the walls as well and needed by the children of Israel. And so as we come to chapter 4, let's go ahead and look at the first couple of verses of Nehemiah chapter 4. We're going to start in verse 7, and it says this. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. So the first thing that we see in the need for the battle plan is because there's some increased pressure happening here, some increased pressure. It tells us the groups of people, the enemies that are out against Nehemiah, against the children of Israel, God's people, as they are trying to rebuild the walls and repair the gates in Jerusalem. And we have some familiar characters here. We know the enemies. We know of Sanballat, who is with the Samaritans to the north of Jerusalem. So we're familiar with him. We're also familiar with the next character mentioned there, Tobiah, who is with the Ammonites, and he is to the east of Jerusalem. We also have, as we saw, I believe it was last week, Geshem, who is with the Arabs, which are mentioned there. They are located to the south of Jerusalem. And now we have a new enemy on the scene, and this is the Ashdodites. And these would be parts of a Philistine enemy and a Philistine army who we know historically has been against God and his people. And they are to the west of Jerusalem. So, from a military standpoint, strategic planning. This is not good. Things are not looking good for Israel. They have enemies surrounding them from all sides, from the north, from the east, from the south, from the west. Everywhere they turn, there is a group of people out to get them. These enemies who are seeking to put an end, not just to the rebuilding of the walls, not just to the restoration of the work they're doing in Jerusalem, but really to put an end to them themselves as a nation, Israel as a nation. And so we see this increased pressure that's taking place. But also what we have to remember is this. Last week, we saw the sort of psychological warfare. Remember how they were throwing insults and sort of saying, you'll never build the wall. A fox could jump up on the wall and it would tear the whole wall down, right? Those sort of mental, psychological insults that were hurled and thrown at them. Well, now we've moved from a psychological to an actual physical threat. We've advanced in this way. But there is one thing that we didn't have time to note last week that I want to note here. Go back up to verse 6. This is after the insults have been thrown. This is after that sort of imprecatory prayer that Nehemiah prays. Verse 6, it says, "So we built the wall. The entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work." And there's an important principle here that we need to understand. That in spite of the pressure, that in spite of the insults that were thrown from the enemy, it didn't put a stop to the work that the people were doing. And I think it's oftentimes, and we'll see this a little bit later on as well, but when we are being oppressed, or we are starting to feel pressure, or people are coming after us or attacking us for our faith or what we believe or standing up for our faith, oftentimes we tend to stop. Maybe it discourages us to continue in our faith. Maybe it says, maybe they are right. Maybe what I believe is stupid or silly, or it's just different or weird or whatever it might be. And oftentimes as believers, we can tend to pull back from the work that we are doing and the work that we are called to do. But again, interesting to note here, that's not the response of Nehemiah and of the workers in Israel. It says they built the wall. The entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. When faced with pressure, when faced with opposition, we cannot cease the job. We can't sit down on the job. We have to continue. We have to keep working. And Nehemiah and the other children of Israel who are working here, they do that. A good testimony of that. But as we see again, verse 7 and verse 8, we have the oppression, the increased pressure which is coming upon them. And these physical threats, again, now it's becoming a physical threat where they say that they are going to come and we'll see they want to destroy them. They want to put a cease to their work. They really want to destroy the nation, is going to have its toll on these people. But I'm sure we've had those moments where we have felt that pressure. Whether it's just the world that we live in today, the culture that we are in, whether it's sin or temptation in our life, we just feel like things are closing in on us and we have nowhere to turn. Elsewhere in Scripture, we see those phrases used by Paul, especially talking about pressure and being perplexed, the idea of us being locked in, backed into a corner where you don't have anywhere to turn or nowhere to go. I've told this story before in terms of this is the idea of pressure and feeling that pressure. The ping pong, the legendary ping pong battles in the Johnson household. Growing up, we had the ping pong table in the basement, and my brother and I, oldest brother Tony and I, we would play some pretty radical games of ping pong against each other, and they usually ended up pretty testy, right? Not the best. And I remember one particular time I was losing by a lot, and so my response was the ball came back to me, and instead of just trying to hit it over the net, I just brought that paddle back, and I just whipped that ping pong ball, and I just tried to hit him as hard as I could right in the stomach, leave a little welt on him, make sure he remembered who he was messing with. But I'm the younger brother, so this was not good. This is also why the Macs really don't want me playing ping pong over at their house. No. So I remember he kind of was taken aback, and he looked, and then all of a sudden he started approaching me with the paddle, to which I knew this was a dangerous situation. And me, in my wisdom, instead of running up the stairs to yell for my mother, decided to run into a corner where there was nothing there. It's just the end of the basement. There's nowhere I could turn. So he's approaching me with the paddle because now I've become the ping pong ball, and he's approaching me with the paddle. He's going to hit me, and he's gearing up, and I was able to kind of like get my way out of it, and then I just backed myself up into the freezer, and he's coming at me, and there was nowhere to turn. I was backed into a corner. He's coming at me with the paddles, and I did the only thing I could do, and I just yelled out for my mother, and I cried like a little boy, and she came. And since last week when that happened, I haven't been invited back since. So, but there are times in our spiritual lives where we just feel pressure, and we just can't turn anywhere. We feel like we're backed into a corner. Say, I can't do anything. I know that this attack is coming. I know that it's impending. I know that these people are against me. They're against you, God. And we feel the immensity of that pressure weighing down on us. And that is exactly what is happening here to Israel. They're feeling the enemies surrounding them on all sides. The pressure is on. And so we're going to see what the response is going to be. So we pick up in verse 9. Look what it says. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God. Because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. So what should our response be? It should be increased prayer. When we are feeling that pressure, when the pressure is amping up for whatever reason, prayer is the appropriate response. And we see that demonstrated for us with Nehemiah and the people. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. And we see that this response to the threat is still consistent with what we know about Nehemiah's leadership, right? We've already had on 3 separate occasions so far where Nehemiah has continued to pray, and he's been praying when faced with a difficult circumstance, when faced with an obstacle, when faced with something that is against him, he turns to prayer. And that is obviously something that we need to be practicing ourselves. As that pressure increases, as we're faced with more enemies or as we're faced with more temptation, is our response turning to God in prayer first and foremost. But we see not only do they pray, but they also act. Look back at what it says in verse 9. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to God, and because of them, we set a watch against them day and night. And we've addressed this before, but prayer doesn't negate action. Prayer doesn't negate action. You see what they did? They established a watch. It wasn't that they were just faced with these enemies. They're surrounded on all sides. The enemies are coming in, and they say, all right, let's just pray to God. God help us get through this, and that's it. No, they take action. They establish a watch. They're prepared. They're getting ready. We saw this earlier. Nehemiah, as he is approaching, getting ready to approach King Artaxerxes and ready to ask about going back to Jerusalem to rebuild the walls. He was praying for months and months and months, but also he was planning during that time, preparing. He was ready to take action. And I think oftentimes in our Christian lives, we try to do the action part before we do the prayer part, and it gets us in trouble. Our first response when we are feeling oppressed, or our first response when we're feeling some pressure, is, well, I need to do something. I need to act. I need to figure this out. When really what it should be is, let me go to God first in prayer so I can get the answer of how I should act. To condition the actions with, I've talked to God, I've addressed it with God, I've prayed to God, and now maybe He has revealed something through His Word that gives me the direction I should go. This is how I should respond. This is how I should act. And so we have to understand that prayer does not negate action. I'm going to pick on Barb Page here a little bit. Sorry, Barb. I know. I think it was last week, maybe 2 weeks ago, Barb was here with some others doing some of the financial things, and Barb had left. And I'm in the office, and I get a phone call, and I go answer the phone, and it's Barb. And she says, Pastor Ben, have you seen a purse? As your purse, right? Have you seen a purse or a wallet laying around at the church anywhere? And then she said, I think it's still in this room, if you could go check. And I said, all right, I'll go check. So I went, I looked a couple other places, couldn't find it. I came back to the phone, I said, Barb, I can't find your wallet. It's nowhere to be found. She's like, okay, all right, well, I guess I'll keep looking. So I hung up the phone, and I was thinking to myself, I thought, in my life, and my wife can be a testament to this. In my life, when I lose things, my first response is never to pray that God would help me find those things. Like when I lose my wallet because I accidentally put it in the refrigerator again, my first response is not, God, please help me find my wallet because I just don't know where it is. My first response is always, this is so inconvenient. I hate my life. Right? That's my first response. But for Barb, my first response was, all right, I'm going to pray really quick. So I said a quick prayer, like, God, I hope Barb can find her wallet. And 3 seconds later, guess what happens? The phone rings, and Barb says, Pastor Ben, I found my wallet. She said some other derogatory things about herself, but she said, I found my wallet. And I said to Barb, I said, wow, that's the quickest answer to prayer I think I've ever had, because she found her wallet. But oftentimes, our first step isn't that we're going to pray. We don't think about that usually as a natural thing, but it should be. But also, again, with the action aspect of that, Barb could pray all she wants that her wallet just magically appears, but if she never goes looking for her wallet, guess what she's probably not going to find? Her wallet, right? We can't let prayer negate action. We use prayer to hopefully dictate our action and how we should respond. And so when we have increased pressure, we need, therefore, to increase in our prayer. But not only that, but we also see something else that happens here, is that there's increased doubt as we continue to read. Look what it says starting at verse 10. It says, Then Judah said, the strength of the laborers is failing. There is so much rubbish that we're not able to build the wall. And our adversaries said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was when the Jews who dwelt near them came that they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. Therefore I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings. I set the people according to their families, with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. And we'll stop right there, but there's something that we need to note in the initial response in verse 10, and that's that prayer doesn't automatically fix our attitude. Because note what happened here. They feel the pressure has been increased, so their response is, we're going to pray, which is an appropriate response. They turn to God, they establish a plan, but then back in verse 10, look what they're saying. The strength of the laborers is failing. There's so much rubbish that we're not able to build the wall. Our adversary said, they'll neither know nor see anything till we come in the midst and kill them, cause the work to cease. So it was the Jews who dwelt near them came, they told us 10 times, from whatever place you turn, they'll be upon us. They're beginning to feel the pressure again. So many times we turn to prayer thinking that it's a magical sort of thing. All of our problems will go away, and sometimes God is able to provide us answers very quickly. Sometimes God is able to give us the peace, and we should have that peace knowing that it belongs to God. But we often have to continue praying. We have to keep at it because our problems aren't usually automatically just solved. And here the people began to feel that pressure again. They began to doubt. Yes, they turned to God. Yes, they prayed, but they needed to continue. They needed to do it again. They needed to hold fast and to remember, but they became fearful. They started questioning the work that they were doing. It says there's so much rubbish, we're not able to build the wall. They were concerned that this would never get done. You see the threat. It says they neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. There's a real physical threat now against their lives. Not just the work, but their own lives. So they become fearful, and the doubt begins to increase. And even in the response from Nehemiah in verse 14, he starts, do not be afraid of them. He sensed the fear that these people were having. Prayer is a great tool for us to keep going back to continue to talk to God, to continue to pray to God when we feel our attitude going back, where our doubt increasing, we become more fearful. We need to understand that it's a resource for us, a tool to be used to talk to God and to find those answers in the proper direction to go. But oftentimes we think one prayer is done, it's going to fix everything, and that's not the case all the time. The people can still, and here are still fearful. Something else to note here is that increased opposition can lead to negative influence. Increased opposition can lead to negative influence. You look at the response of these people, they're hearing the rumors. They're hearing the threat of the enemy. Verse 11, again, it says, this is them really just quoting what these enemies are saying. They will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. No doubt that the people who are working on the walls, the people who are hearing these things, they hear it from the enemies, they hear the murmurings, they hear it over and over and over again, and they allow it to affect them. They allow it to influence them negatively, to the point where now they are truly afraid. They think, well, this could really happen. We could really, really die. And they forget about who the person is that they are serving. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33. I'll just turn there quick and read this for you. Very similar sort of principle to this idea. It says this, but, verse 33, not 13. Verse 15, verse 33 says, do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits. We get ourselves in positions where we tend to be surrounded by enemies, surrounded by opposition, and if we continue to let it affect us, it can lead to a negative response, negative influence. This morning we talked about what our attitude and response should be in the workplace. And pastors mentioned it before, but I'm grateful that every day when I come to work, I can come to a workplace where I know that the people I'm working with are saved, and we can have spiritual conversations and encourage one another in spiritual things. But many people don't have that. Surrounded by ungodly people, and enough time with ungodly people, enough time with that opposition and with those who are opposed to Christ can often lead to a negative influence, which can lead to increased doubt, fear, questioning, wondering. So we need to be careful about those things. One of the things that I'm grateful that we have the basketball ministry here at the church that we have. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to open up the gym to those guys and that they can come, and I've been able to have conversations with many of those guys about spiritual things. Some of them have even come to church on different occasions. But let me tell you, one night a week is plenty for that, for me, spiritually speaking. The type of lives that they are living, the type of conversations that they have, the language that they use, there's only so much that you can be around it before it starts to weigh on you. And so we need to be careful about all those things that we allow in, all of the influence that we allow in that could be rubbing off on us. Recently, we had the men's conference, and one of the things that one of the speakers had mentioned was listening and reading too much into the news all of the time, and just absorbing all of those things and taking it all in, and all of a sudden we become bitter people, we become negative people because we're just allowing all of these influences into our lives, into our minds, into our hearts, and that's what's going to come out. We need to be cautious and to be careful. Negative influence, and it can lead here, as it does for the people, to increased doubt. So we have, as part of the battle plan, Nehemiah, how he responds to this is going to ultimately lead to increased trust. Look at verse 14. It says, I looked, arose, said to the nobles, to the leaders, to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. It's kind of a twofold response. He says, he gives them personal encouragement to keep going, to press on. Again, they have that fear that is there, but in verse 13, it says, therefore I position men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings. I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. You look at the second part of verse 14, he says, fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. So Nehemiah had positioned those people where the weak spots were, where the openings were at the walls, where they were still broken down, they hadn't been rebuilt up yet. Nehemiah positioned the people in family groups. And he also probably, again, we talked about when we looked at his sort of tour around the wall, how a lot of the houses the back of the house was really a part of the wall. And so there was the encouragement for them to rebuild the wall because they would be rebuilding part of their house. So he also positioned some of the family together outside of their house to be able to protect it. And he does that because it's a personal encouragement to keep going and to keep fighting. Because it's different when you are fighting for your own family, when you're fighting for your kids, when you're fighting for your spouse, when you're fighting for family members for your own house. If that's what's on the line, you're going to fight differently. And so he establishes that as a part of his plan. It was a couple nights ago. We have some interesting things happen on our street because of the dead end where we live and the quarry that's up there, and a whole bunch of hoodlums like to come up to the quarry at times. So the other night, it must have been on Thursday, I got home from basketball, I jumped into the shower, and I get out, and Auni is on the phone with the police, which is not something that's crazy rare because of the street that we live on. We've called the police on several occasions. But she's on the phone with the police, and she's telling them that there was a lady who just showed up on our front porch, and this is like at 10 o'clock at night. And she knocks on the door, and she's like, my friends left without me, and they left, and I think they're all drunk, and I don't know what to do, and blah, 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 blah. And so she was, going to be like, well, come on inside, we can, help you, whatever. So she's calling the police. But then the friends come back, and they're like, oh, it's cool, it's totally cool, she's fine, this is okay. And so the friend left and went back into the car with them, and I don't know, he's trying to get her not to, but she goes, and she's on the phone with the police and describing all these things. And I was glad, kind of, that I wasn't there, because I'm sure my response would have been completely different than what her response was to that situation. Because in the sense of protecting my family, right, my wife and my kid, and protecting my house, I'm going to be up in arms, right? I don't own guns, but let me tell you something. If an intruder comes into my house, I don't need guns, right? I'm going to defend my family. I'm going to protect my family. Alan's back there like, yeah, Pastor Ben, that's cool. Yeah, all right, yeah, right? But that's the response that we should have, right? It's personal encouragement. When your family, when what you have is on the line, you're going to fight differently for it. And that's why Nehemiah positions them the way he does. He not only does that, but he also does this. He gives some spiritual encouragement. Look at the first part of verse 14. I looked, arose, said to the nobles, to the leaders, to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord great and awesome. Here's what he's telling them to do. Remember who you fight for. Our God is not a puny God. Our God is not someone who is able to be defeated, right? Our God is a God who is awesome and who is mighty and who is just and who is perfect, who is eternal, who can overthrow kings and principalities and powers. He can do whatever it is he desires to do, he wants, right? That's our mighty, our awesome God. And Nehemiah's encouragement to them here is, remember who it is you're fighting for. Remember why we are doing what we're doing. Remember why we are continuing this work. And yes, we may have enemies. Yes, we may have opposition. Yes, we may have pressure, but God is still on the throne. Remember that. And so for us to increase our trust and to help us as maybe our doubt has increased because that opposition and that pressure has returned, we need to remind ourselves of who God is. We serve a mighty and an awesome and a majestic God. And we don't have to fear any enemy as long as we are on his side. And so our trust in him needs to increase as a response to pressure and a response to doubt. And then finally here it came also this battle plan with increased protection. Increased protection. Look at verse 16. He says, so it was from that time on that half of my servants worked at the construction, while the other half held the spears, the shields, the bows, and wore armor. The leaders were behind all of the house of Judah. Those who built on the wall, those who carried burdens, loaded themselves so that with one hand they worked at construction, with the other they held a weapon. Every one of the builders had his sword girded at his side as he built, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. Then I said to the nobles, the rulers, the rest of the people, the work is great, extensive. We are separated far from one another on the wall. Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. So we labored in the work, and half of the men held the spears from daybreak until the stars appeared. At the same time, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem, that they may be our guard by night and a working party by day. So neither I, my brethren, my servants, nor the men of the guard who followed me took off our clothes, except that everyone took them off for washing. So there's a couple sort of levels of protection that Nehemiah makes sure are offered to the people here. And the first one is that personal protection. In verse 17 and verse 18, he tells these construction people doing the construction, it says that they are working with one hand and holding a weapon with the other. It says that they have a sword girded at their side as they built. So that way, if as they are building, someone comes to try to attack them, they are ready to attack. So he provides that aspect of personal protection for them. But also there's a level of corporate protection. Verse 19, he goes on, and he says he talks to the nobles, the rulers, and the people. He notes how the work is great and how they are spread out as they are working on these various parts of the wall as they're rebuilding it. And so he says, because of that, verse 20, wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us. It says so. We labored in the work. Half of the men held spears from daybreak until the stars appeared. So they have this corporate protection, where if you hear the trumpet, it's this rallying. We're going to come together. We're going to defend together, work together to protect one another. And even as some were working, others were sort of standing behind, holding spears just in case this attack was to come. They were providing and helping one another. And then there was also this sense of unending protection. Verse 22, it says, at the same time, I also said to the people, let each man and his servant stay at night in Jerusalem. No more leaving, no more going home. Some of these people that were coming from outside to work on the walls, now he wants them to stay. He wants people to stay in Jerusalem, that they might be our guard by night and a working party by day. You see what they did in verse 23. It says that they didn't take off their clothes at all unless they were washing them, right? They want to be on guard. They want to be ready night and day at all times for this attack if it does come. And I think these levels of protection we can really relate in our own spiritual lives as we face that opposition, as we develop some battle plans for ourselves. The personal protection, what we have in our Word, what God has given us as we study His Word. Verses that we can think of, verses that we can remember, characteristics of God that we cling to and hold to, promises that we think of as we are dealing with opposition. The use of prayer would be an aspect of our own personal protection, things we can do in and of ourselves or by ourselves in order to increase that protection against the attacks of the enemy. The second one is that corporate protection. Coming together as believers, helping one another, encouraging one another to stand up against opposition together. Again, I'm so grateful for being a part of a church that people are willing and able to encourage and pray for one another, and how undervalued that really is. You know, it's been nice that we've moved youth group from Wednesdays to Sundays, and I've been able to be in for the last couple of prayer meetings that we've had. And I think since I started here, I've probably only been to maybe one or two other prayer meetings because we always had youth group. And I tell you, I value the time that I can now pray with other people in that way. Hearing requests and talking and being encouraged in that way, there is something to be said about having that corporate protection, encouragement, building one another up as we face opposition. And understanding that we can never let our guard down. We always have to be ready. We always have to be prepared. Satan will continue to try to attack. The enemy will try to continue to attack. They will try to oppress us. We must always be on lest we let our guard fall and we expose ourselves to the enemy and he attacks. So we use those levels of protection. We see how Nehemiah was able to use them to the advantage of his battle plan and how he's protecting the children of Israel. And ultimately what we will see later on here is that because of these battle plans, because of what was known and the protections they set up, they were able to eventually thwart the attacks of the enemy because they were ready for it. So as we face an increase in opposition, as we maybe are even increased in our doubt, wondering whether or not living for God and following God and doing all these things is really worth it, we need to make sure that we're increasing in prayer, we're increasing our trust, and we have that increased protection. What is your battle plan? Are you ready as we face that opposition, as we face the enemy? We need to be prepared. Let's stand for a closing word of prayer. Dear God, we are grateful that you have given us so many different avenues and resources and ways in which we can stand strong and firm for you. God, you have given us your word, an endless knowledge, an endless tool of truth and promise to encourage us, to teach us, Lord. God, you have given us prayer, the ability to talk, to converse with you, the God of the universe. Lord, you have given us the church, other believers to come alongside and to help one another as we learn, as we grow, as we struggle together in our faith. God, help us to not think of these things as just, they're always going to be there. Just take them for granted, whatever it might be, Lord, but to really utilize them to understand how important, how crucial they are to our walk with you. Lord, we know the attacks of the enemy are coming. We know that the pressure that we will feel undoubtedly will increase as the world turns more and more against you. God, we will feel what it is to be oppressed and to be persecuted, I'm sure. So God, help us to take that stand. Help us to be ready. Help us to prepare the battle plan that we need to stand for you. So God, we thank you how you worked in Nehemiah and how you worked in the children of Israel as they rebuilt the wall to thwart the attack as they were prepared for it. And for those lessons that we can learn and cling to and apply to ourselves as we also try to turn away our enemies in the attacks of Satan against us. So God, we thank you for who you are. We thank you that we know who it is we are fighting for, whose side we are on, because there is no one greater, more awesome, more mighty than you. So God, help us to be prepared and to be ready as we strive, as we live for you. And we ask these things in your Son's name. Amen.